Hi there once again, and welcome to another Xpresso mechanic tutorial. And this is the second and final part in my series on creating text effects with thinking particles. Now in this one we're obviously going to be creating something that resembles paint being splashed against a wall and then starting to run down the wall. In order to achieve this, we're actually going to be using the Expresso that we used in our ident tutorial. So the Expresso from our last tutorial, we will use much of it. There'll be some slight changes. We will need to take some elements of it away and add some new elements. And we'll also be using matrix objects and some random effectors to create the desired results here. That's what we're going to be about in this tutorial. So without further ado, let's see if we can make this happen. Okay, so I've got a new file, and as you can see, I've stripped it down to its bare minimum here. I've just got a gravity object. I've got a camera here which we can change the view so that we can see when we've got our text set up, that will be working for us. That's just why that's there. But I've got a gravity object which I had in the previous tutorial, and I've got just one Expresso expression here. And if we just open this up, we can see that we've got a number of things that are slightly different, because obviously our objects here are no longer there. So our base spline and target spline, they're no longer in the scene. So we've got yellow tops on those, and we can just delete them. This object here, now this would be the M, and we had the viewport visibility and the renderer visibility. We can remove that, and we can also remove this compare. So let's just get rid of those two. Finally, up here we've got this E group. I'm going to delete this and then just add a new group. So we'll just add a thinking particles standard P group and just connect this here for now. Okay, so that's the basic expression set up, and we can leave this here for now and then return to it later on when we need to make some adjustments to it. So we'll just close that down for now, and then we can think about moving on to our next step. I'll bring in a text spline, so we've got one of those, and then we'll select our font. Now before we go any further, let's just switch to the internet here. Now, the font I'm going to use, it's a free font. It's from 1001 fonts, or 1001 free fonts, I suppose I should say. So if you go there to 1001freefonts.com, if you wish to use this particular font, it's in the horror tab here. It's just under this. And here you've got the pages. If you go to page 8, you come down to here, you find a font called Creepster. And that's the font that I used. Okay, so that's, if you wish to use the same font, that's where you can get it from for absolutely nothing. And I'm not being sponsored by 1001 free fonts. They're nothing to do with me. It was just the place where I happened to find a font that I liked that would lend itself to this paint effect that I'm actually making. But anyway, that's great. So that's sorted that little bit out. Let's just go back to Cinema 4D, and we can start thinking about this text. So in my font, let's find Creepster. And it's just here. So there we go, we've got Creepster. And we'll type in the word splat with an exclamation mark. And we might as well just move this over to here somewhere. We can place it pretty much anywhere we like. Let's just see what it looks like through the camera that I've got in here. It's not quite in the right position, is it? So let's take away this restriction tag. I'll just move it onto the spline for a minute, and we'll move our camera so that we can get it in the correct place. Let's just move over there. It's just, if we can just move the camera back a little bit, it's going to view, top view, so F2, and we'll move the camera back a little way. That's fine, isn't it? That's about centered. So we'll put our restriction tag back on the camera, and that's great. We can work with that later on. So we'll just move this out of the way. Now, at the moment, we've got all of the letters in the text spline as one. What I want to use is separate letters, so I'll just click on there. And then I'm going to hit C to make this editable, and then remove the letters from the text spline there. And we can think about what we're going to do with these. Now, we will add them to extrude objects. So let's just hold down the Option key, because I want them each to have their own extrude object, and just hit that. Now in the offset here, I'm going to set this to 0 because I just want flat text. Don't need caps, don't need to worry about any of that. This is set up the way it needs to be. And then we can just rename them, and we can just call this S, P, L, A, T, and finally the exclamation mark. And then with our splines here, these are going to be the base splines. So S base, and we'll rename them as we go along. So this will be P base, L base, A base, T base, and finally exclamation base. So we've got all of those in there, and they're ready to go for us a little bit later on. Fantastic. The next thing we need to do though is copy all of these splines, and these need to be made into the target splines. So we can rename them once again with the word target after the letters. Oops, I don't want to do that. Ooh, I've got rid of it completely. Don't want to do that. Let's just take the word base out of there. That's fine. T target. And finally, exclamation target. Okay, so we've got all of those set up and they're ready to go. What I'll do is group these into a null. So Option G to group and call them target splines, just to tidy things up a little bit. Fab. So our splines are in and they're pretty much ready to go. So let's move on to our next step and think about where we're going from here. The next thing to do is add a little bit of color to our text. So we can do this by adding a texture actually. I'll double click in here, and then in the color channel, let's just make this a blue. Something like that I think will do nicely. It doesn't matter what color you choose. And then I'll drag this onto the S extrude object and then command drag to copy to our remaining extrude objects. Okay, great. So we've got a little bit of color in the scene. And then we can think about positioning our splines. So with our, well, it will be our splines and also our extrudes, but we'll select all of the extrudes and we'll just move these down to here. Well, in fact, what we'll do is, where are we? We were okay. I think as long as it's pretty much level with the position 0 along the Y. It doesn't have to be perfect, but anyway, we'll leave it there. That should be okay. And then with our target splines here, I'll just select the null that they're in and then drag them over to here, and I'll just move them up a little bit so that there's that distance between them in the Z or along the Z axis and also in the Y. Moving on from here, we'll work with each of our letters because at the moment they're far too regular, so I'm just going to rotate the S round to its left. The P, again, I'll rotate this just slightly to the left, and I'll also move it up a little bit higher. The L, I'll just move it up a tiny bit and just rotate this one just very, very slightly, I think, to the left, just to make it that little bit irregular. And then we can think about doing the rest of our letters as well. The A, I think we'll move that slightly to its right, and again just move it up in the Y. And finally the T and the exclamation mark, I'm just going to rotate this round to the right and perhaps move it a little bit closer to the A, and then perhaps put it somewhere here. And the exclamation mark, let's just rotate that round to its right and just move it up very slightly and a tiny bit to its left. And I think that looks okay. I mean, again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. Do it in any way you choose, as long as it's pleasing to your eye, that's fine. Okay, so that's our splines taken care of. Now, the word splat here, in its initial state, it won't even resemble a word. It's going to be like little daubs of paint. That's what we're going to be setting up there. And I'm going to be using matrix objects to do that. But before we go there, we'll set up some thinking particle groups. In our simulate menu, we'll come down to thinking particles, TP settings. Our group here, I'm going to hold down my control key, click on the group and add, and I'll do that 6 times to add 6 groups. And we've got those. We can just rename them. So S, P, L, A, T, and finally exclamation mark. And that gets our groups all named correctly. The next thing to do is just colour them. So we'll use a yellow for the S, and you can colour these however you like. I'll just use cyan there. A pink for the L, that'll do nicely. The A, well, we can use a red for that. Let's just take those 2 down. And perhaps a blue, so we'll bring these 2 down. And finally a green, I think. And that will do fine. So we've got our 6 groups. They're all named and they're all coloured accordingly. So that's great, and that's all looking good. So now we can think about bringing in some matrices. We'll bring in our first matrix object. So come down to our menu here and just grab a hold of one of those. Now let's think about how we're going to set this up. So with our object tab here, the mode will want to be radial. Generate, we will want thinking particles, and we've got TP group here. So straight away we can come into our simulate, thinking particles, settings, and we can bring in the S group. So we'll grab a hold of the S, drag that into the field, and now that's waiting and ready to go. Our particle priority will set to after effectors because we will be using effectors. We don't need to worry about the count, that's going to be controlled by Expresso. Our radius, we can just make that 20, and our plane XY. So that's got that set up as it needs to be, and we don't need to do anything else. The only thing we can do, I'll tell you what I'll do, is just dock this. If I dock this there, just make it a little bit smaller. That will do nicely. And then in our 3D view here, we can just move this into place. So it needs to be where the S is. We'll just move it up a little bit, say there. Doesn't really matter where they go, but I'm just going to do that for the sake of lining things up nicely with regard to what we've got here. The matrix now, we've got that ready. So we'll call this S matrix. And then simply command drag to copy 5 times to give us 6 matrices. We've got those. We need to just rename them, and we need to think about giving them their correct TP groups. So our first one we know will be P matrix, and it will need the P group from here dragged into the TP group field. Repeat the process. It's just a case of rinse and repeat. So by the power of editing, I'll get this done and come back to you. And we'll just drag the exclamation mark into the TP group for the last one, and we're ready to go. Okay, that's fantastic. We've got all of our matrices now set up with their appropriate groups for the thinking particles. And now we can move on from here and think about working with Expresso again. So if we go into our expression, the first thing we need to do is actually drag the TP group for the letter S into here. So let's go into our simulate here, just grab a hold of this and put that in there. So our first expression now has its TP group. Moving on from here, we can think about bringing some things into these. So what we need to do is bring in our S base. We'll bring that in here. That will go down there, and give it an object port and connect it to the object input of the point node. So we've got that in there. Now the next thing we can do is bring in this matrix here, the S matrix, and our point count from the base spline can be used for the count value of this matrix here. So let's see where we are here. Object properties, we've got our count in there. and we can simply connect the point count to there, and that should set that matrix up. If we select it, let's have a look and see what we've got. Now at the moment we've got nothing coming in from our points. We should do, but at the moment we don't. Now let's just see why that might be. Let's just go back to the beginning and just move one frame. And now we've moved one frame, and now we've got 91 points. And that's correct. That's what we should get. And we can see that things have changed and things have moved around here. They're not set up as they need to be, but they have moved around. The next thing to do is actually to bring in the S target. We'll bring that into here. Give that an object port and plumb it into the object input port of this point node. Okay, so now let's see if that makes any difference. It does. We've changed again. So you can see that this is starting to affect things. It's not working absolutely right yet because there's still more that we need to do, but it is starting to affect things. Okay. Brilliant. So the next thing that we need to do then is think in terms of what we're going to be doing with our matrix here. Now we want to use an effector, and we want to use a random effector. So let's just come down to our effectors. Random effector is what we're going to be using. So we've got our first one in. I'm going to rename it so that we know what it is, the S random, and we can set this up. Now it needs to be in random mode. That should be fine for it. If we just select our S and make sure that we've got the random in there, we have, because our matrix was selected when we brought the random effector in. So that's okay, we've got that. Now let's have a look and see what we want. We just need to know what we've got to do with our parameters, and that's our next step. Our transform mode and transform space can be left as they are. We do wish to work with position, but we don't want to be using 50. We just want to be 5 in the X, 5 in the Y, and finally 0 in the Z. Scale and rotation we can ignore, and we can ignore everything else in here. Finally, in the Effector tab, we can just check indexed. Now let's just have a quick check and see what we've got. If we just go back to 0 and move, do we change anything? Not at the moment. The only other thing I will do is just switch the matrix to invisible in both the viewport and renderer. And we can also think about setting some of these others up as well. Actually, what we'll do is grab a hold of these and just move them into the positions where I think they should be. So we'll move the L to where the L is, the A to where the A is, and the T and the exclamation mark into positions that look appropriate. So we'll move those there. I mean, we can see that there are things going on with the effector that are heading in the right direction. Let's just play the timeline, and we can see straight away that that actually did morph to where the splat text is. It's not 100% correct yet because all the matrices are moving, but we'll sort that out. But we're certainly getting a morph between our initial state and our target state, which is all good. So we've got things moving in the correct direction, but there's a few more things that we need to do in order to get things working absolutely as we need them to. Okay, so let's move on from here and see where we go next. So we've got a couple of things that we need to do. The first is to update our ppass node, because at the moment it has no group. So we need to get a group into here, and of course we need to drag the S group into here, and that gets that part of it set up. Now at the moment we've got 91. We know that we have from our matrix, if we select that again, we've got a point count value of 91, but at the moment that's not reflected in our P storm because our shot value is 36. So that's why we're getting this odd shape here. It's not correct. It's a bit weird and wonderful, so we've got to sort that out. The way we're going to do that is to add a shot input port to the P storm. We're just going to move this over here slightly, and we're going to use the point count from our target. We could use either, but for the sake of tidiness, I'm going to use this point count and plumb it into here. Okay, now that should help to sort that issue out. If we just close this window down for a minute, go back to the start of our animation and move forward 1 frame and see if that makes any difference. Well, we can see that it definitely has. We've got our matrix, and I've just made that visible again in the edit. With our matrix, we can see that all of our matrices now are around the outside edge of the S, and they weren't before. We were only getting a small number of them. Now, if we just make our matrix invisible again and move forward 1 frame, and now we can see what we've got is something resembling a daub of paint, and that's exactly what we want. So that's our initial state, and if we then move through, we can see that it morphs into the S and it places itself correctly. That's what we need to do. Okay, so that's really nice. That's working exactly as we need it to now. So that's fantastic, and we can now think about where we're going to go next. Well, we're going to add a null and we're going to rename it controller. And then we're going to think about adding some user data to it. So we'll add user data, and the first thing we'll do is just get rid of this data, add a group, call it controls, and we'll drag it away from our user data so that it becomes the dominant force, as it were. And then we can add a group to this group and rename it S, add some data, and this will be S base spline. Add some more data, and this will be S target spline. So we've got those two sorted out. Now we need to select both of these and change their data types, and they will be links. That's great. So now all we need to do is just close this up and rinse and repeat. So I'll command drag to copy, rename this P, open it up and rename these P base spline and P target spline. And then it's just a case of rinse and repeat. So by the power of editing, I'll get this done and then come back to you. And the last one, and we're there. So now we've got all of our groups set up and ready to go. Fantastic. So that's the first part of this done. There will be some more to add a little bit later, but we'll leave it here for now. We'll just hit OK. So fantastic. That's all in. We've got our controls here. We just select that tab and we've got it. It's all ready and waiting to go. So the next thing to do is actually populate these link fields with the correct splines. So let's just get the dropper. We need a base spline in there. We also need add target. So we've got those two in there. We might as well do them all. Again, I'm going to do this by the power of editing and come back to you because there's just no point wasting your time. So let's carry on from here. And finally, we can just add the exclamation mark target, and we've got everything populated. Fantastic. So the next step is to work within the Xpresso expression once again. So we'll get this open, and we can start by removing these two because we don't need them anymore. And we can bring in our controller and then work with the user data that we've just created. So in our controls, we need to come down to the S here and select target spline and do the same thing again with the base spline. So they're now in position and they're in the correct order, and we can just connect them up accordingly, so to our object ports of our point nodes. And now if we run the timeline, we should find that we're getting the same result as we were getting previously, and we are. It's all working. So that's fine, that's done the job. Moving on from here, we need to add a couple more nodes and do a little bit of rearranging just to get things working out as we need them to be. So let's see where we are. We just need to move, I think, let's have a look. We just need, yeah, our gravity. if we just move this down here for a second, and if we get these here, just move them up so they're a little bit closer to the P-storm, and then we can move all of this just over here slightly, and our gravity now, we can position this up in here. So that's just tidied things up a little bit. Now with our gravity node, we can add mass dependence, and we can also add strength, because we are going to be using mass, and that's the next node that we need to bring in. Actually, we'll come down to our thinking particles standard menu here and grab in a P mass. So we've got one of those. We can connect our particle output port to the particle input port of the mass, and in here we'll leave the actual mass control here or parameter here at 1, but the variance will make, or variation I should say, will make that 100%. Okay, and then we can work with our pget data here, add a mass port at the output stage, just place it at the top, and then that can be plumbed into our mass dependence for our gravity. So these are all going to be working together. Moving on from here, we need a friction node, so we'll come down to our thinking particles dynamics, friction, P friction. So we want one of those, and we'll plumb our particles into there. We won't worry about working with the parameters for this yet. We may be able to just leave them as they are, but if we need to, we can always work with those a little bit later. But that's fine. We've got things a little bit further on now, and then the next thing we need to worry about is this strength for our gravity. Now we're going to be doing this from the controller, so we need to add some more user data to that, and that's the next step for us. Let's just close the Expresso window, so we'll get that out of the way. In our controller, we can go into user data, manage user data, add a group, and I'll just close all of these. Bring this group down to the bottom, and we'll call this gravity strengths, and then we can start adding some data to this group, and we'll rename this S gravity, and it will be a float type. The interface will be a float slider. The unit value will be real. I will use steps of 1. I will start at 5 for the minimum, 100 for the maximum, and clamp those values. And that's as much as we need to do there, and we can simply copy these and just rename them. So P gravity, I'll copy them first, I think, actually. Just do this 4 more times if it will let me. That's it. Okay, so they're all ready. So this wants to be L A T, and finally exclamation mark. So they're all ready to go, and we can just hit OK. So down at the bottom of our controls, we've now got all of our gravities, and they're just set at the defaults of 5. We'll move these to get rid of the orange bands because we know that they can cause problems. Just get rid of those. Fantastic, and we're ready to go. So we can open up our Expresso expression, and in our controller here, controls, let's see where we are. Where's our gravity? What's going on there? Let's just go. Why have I not seen those? I should be seeing them surely. Let's have a look. Controller. I've got my gravity strengths in there. Oh, I've got a separate. Okay, I've got a separate thing there. I don't want that. Let's just manage user data. Gravity strength. I need that in controls. Let's just put that up the top there. Just move these down there, and if I can just drop that beneath there. No, I don't want it in them. I want it to be part of it. This is causing me a few issues here. Let's just bring this up to the top. I just have to do it one by one. It's a little bit finicky this is. Let's just do this. No, don't want that. That's it. Bring that, close that up, bring that up into there, that up into there, and that just above there. That should be right now. Let's okay that. Let's see where they are. They look as if they're all on the same level now. So let's just go back into our expression. And let's see if we've got them in the controls now. Yes, we have gravity strength. So we want S gravity. And we need that at the top. Okay, fantastic. We can just put that back there. So we can plumb this into our strength control now. Okay, so that sets up our expression. And let's just see what's actually going to go on here now. Let's have a look. We may need to do a little bit of work in our compares, but we'll just see if anything is happening before we go there. But actually it won't be yet, for the simple reason that there's one thing that we definitely need to do. With our gravity, we must give the gravity a gravity object, otherwise nothing is going to happen. So let's just grab this in and drop it in here. So we've got our gravity object in, and we've got everything else set up. Now, there's a few things that we may need to do. Now, our mass, we probably do need to set this lower. I'm going to set it to 0.1. That's the first thing I'll do. The friction in here, the mass dependence, we do need to make 100%. So we'll make that mass dependence 100% in the friction there. And then with our compare, with the gravity here, we want this, now at the moment it's greater than 30. We'll make it greater than 45 so that there's a little bit of a longer delay, another sort of half second delay there, just to make that a little bit more natural. Now our compares here, we're greater than 1, equal to 0. That's perfectly fine for where we are at the moment. I think everything is set up now and it should be okay to at least do something. Let's see what happens if we just run the sequence. So we get there, we pause, and then sure enough we start to move, and we can see that the S is behaving like paint the further it slides down the screen, and that's exactly what we want to happen. So this is working. It's working fine. So that's how you need to set things up. Make sure your mass is 0.1, variation 100%, and your friction, leave these two at 1, and the mass dependence 100%, the size dependence at 0. And then everything else is working fine. We've got the gravity from the controller. At the moment, we're just set to the default value of 5. You can change that, and when we get the others set up, you can change them to various different numbers and you'll get different speeds. So this is a useful way to take control of the art direction. Now, the next thing to do, I'm going to actually make all of these splines disappear because we don't need them anymore. We don't need to see them. They're just simply the target splines. We just need to see this. That's the result that we need to see. So that's taken care of those. Moving on from here then, we need another 5 copies of our Expresso expression, and these need to be set up to make our letters behave correctly. So let's start by copying the expressions. So we'll get 5 of these. I want to put that there. So that's 5 new expressions, and then we can start naming them. So this can be S Expresso, P Expresso, and etc. You know what's coming. Just get these done. Might as well just get them done rather than cutting away. Won't take too long. T Expresso, and finally exclamation mark Expresso. So we've got those all in, and they just need to be set up accordingly, as I say. Let's just start with the first one and see if there's anything we can do in here. Let's have a look at this compare for a start. Right, so equal to 0 is fine. What is this one? It's greater than 1. If we should be able to use greater than 0 in there. Let's put greater than 0 in there. So that's for the monoflop, for triggering that. So let's see what happens when we say greater than 0. So run this. Yep, that's working fine. So we'll leave that like that. Okay, fantastic. So let's take a look at our next Expresso expression and see what we can do in here. For a start, we need to drag in the P group into there, and we also need it in our P pass. So let's just hit H, move this over to here, and then grab our P for our P pass. In fact, what we'll do is, let's have a look. We can select our P pass and drag this into the field, and that gives us that set up. Now, when it comes to our mass and friction nodes, they're both set up okay, so we don't have to do anything in there. Now, in the controller, we definitely do. We want to lose all of these ports, so just delete them, and then we can set this up again. So we want, from our controls, we want the P target, the P base spline, and finally the gravity. So let's go for our P gravity. They're all in. Just put this at the top, and then we can wire them up accordingly. So the strength is going to be wired via the P gravity, and then these into our, oops, that's disappeared. I didn't want to do that. Let's bring that back. P target spline, let's move that to the center, and we can wire this into here and wire this into here. So they're set up and ready to go. Let's see if there's anything else we need to do. There certainly will be, because our gravity, currently we've got this one set at greater than 45 frames. So we'll make this 75 frames because we're always going to add 30. So it'll be 75 here, then 105, etc. So we'll set that to greater than 75, and our compare here, we don't want greater than 1, we want greater than 2, because we set our original, or our S Xpresso, our compare in there, we set to greater than 0. Now that, hopefully, is everything set up. Let's just move this over here and just see where we are. So I think, oh, we've got our S matrix in there. We need to just change that. That needs to be the P matrix. So I'll bring that one in, drop that into here, and now we've got that in there. The P matrix is there. If we go into it, we should find that the count is still 5, but if we go forward 1 frame, instantly we get a count of 80, and that's the number of points that make up our letter P. And we can see that we've got our matrices here. The next thing we need to do is bring in another random, so we'll bring in one of those. This will be called P random. So P random, select our P matrix, drop this into here, and now we can see that that's already working, and it's made things irregular, and we'll get a nice daub of paint if we just make this disappear and make this disappear. Let's just go back to the beginning. Let's also set up our P storm, because at the moment we've got a bit of a funny shape in there. So our P storm, let's have a look and see what we've got there. Is it set up correctly? We can't see the shot value, but it should be set up. We need to bring this in. We're bringing it, well, we are bringing it in from the point, so that should be okay actually. That should set that up okay. Let's just run this and see what happens. Just run it. So we get both of our letters. Just go back to the beginning and go 1 frame. Let's have a look, see what we've got. Let's have a look. Yes, we have got it. There's the actual P splat there. That little daub of paint is there. So we run this and we can see that they actually do work. And I don't want a large time interval between each of them arriving at their destination. So that's why I've set it up the way I have. But they're both working. Let's just run the sequence a little bit further and make sure the gravity is doing its job. It is indeed. What we can do, if we go into our controller, we can set the gravity different for this. Let's make the gravity, say 15. And let's see what happens now. If we run this now, the P should actually catch up and probably overtake the S eventually. Maybe, maybe not. Might need a little bit more gravity in that case. Let's just go back here and make sure everything is okay in the expression. So where are we? Yeah, we've got the P gravity, we've got the strength, so that's there. Everything is set up as it should be, I think. So yeah, it probably just needs to be set slightly differently, but it's probably because of the gap that they've got between them. Let's just bring this up a little bit higher, see what happens when we run it now. And there it goes. And you can see it's going to overtake. That's it. So it just needed a little bit more gravity put in there if it was going to behave that particular way. Okay, fantastic. But you can see the way the sequence is working. I'll get everything set up, and by the power of editing, once again, I'll come back to you when it's all complete. So let's get a hold of this one. Just need to finalize our exclamation group. We'll just drop this into the P-pass this time, and we can see that it's in there. Our compare here needs to be greater than 10 on this occasion, and this one greater than 195. We can then bring our exclamation matrix into there, and then finally we can just set these up. So we'll remove all of these ports and replace them with, there we are, we'll take our gravity from there, and we want our target and base splines from the exclamation group. Okay, they're all set up and ready to go, so let's plumb them in. That gets those done, and that should be it. I think the expression is complete. Just make doubly sure. Yeah, that looks fine. So that's our last expression sorted out there. There's a few more things we need to do. Let's just close that down. Let's have a look, see where we are. We've got our matrix here. I've already put the random effector in there. Just wanted to make sure that you could see that. So that's already set up, and we've got all of our other random effectors ready to go, and they are within their correct matrices. So if we go through, we can see them all in there. What else do we need to look at? Let's just double check the controller. Let's just scroll through, see if there's one thing there. Well, that would have caused a problem. Let's just put the iTarget in there, and that looks as if it's okay. Now I've done some setting here as well. I've got my gravities set up in various different ways so that we get a different result from just a standard setup. So let's just see what happens if we play the sequence. We get everything on the screen, and then they start to move. And there we go. So we're starting to get that effect quite nicely now. That's all working as it should. Let's just go into our camera. It's not, I don't think, set up the way we need it to be. Let's just play the sequence. Or is it? Let's have a look. Well, that's not too bad, is it? It's working quite nicely. Yeah. I mean, the S is actually a little bit slow. It's only 5, so let's just make that, say, 17, 18, somewhere there, just to give it a bit of a random number that's not too regular. There we go. Yeah. That's not too bad an effect, is it? Bit of irregularity in it. So, but you can see how this works. I mean, you can set these up however you like and art direct this to your heart's content in order to get it to move the way you want it to. And you can see our start positions for our daubs of paint. I mean, we can make those different if we wanted to. We could just move our matrices around and make them so that they're more irregular. Let's just move this one down a little bit. Move this a little bit down there. Perhaps bring this one up a little bit and leave that last one where it is. And if we play again, now they're all slightly irregular. If we go back to here and just go forward one frame, we can see that they're a little bit irregular too, which makes it perhaps a little bit more interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's essentially we've got it working. So you can see what's actually happening. I mean, the matrices here, they're literally controlling the start positions of our points that are being generated within our Xpresso here. So the P storm, what's being generated here, because we're putting it into this S group, and the S group is being applied to the S matrix here, and because we've got a random effector on it that's controlling the X and Y positions of the matrices, those matrices points or positions are being given to the points, and that's making this irregular shape. So that's how that's all working for us. And then once again, we've got the base splines. So the base splines are being given these point positions, so they're wrapped around this as well. and the targets are obviously further away from us, and they're where we need to actually morph to. So it's exactly the same as it was before, but just with a little bit of extra stuff in there, and it's a little bit more complex. But it was worth, I think, showing you this technique, because the matrix objects do actually give you a higher degree of artistic control over the thinking particles and actually work with them, because you can control this irregularity here in a different way. I mean, before we just used the randomly generated particles to create a sort of tangle of vectors, but this is something that's more akin, as I said, to a daub of paint. So it just gives you that ability to do that. So we can just do this, and then away we go. But yeah, so that is how you go about doing it. Now let's just have a quick recap on our Xpresso expressions and take a quick look at how we went about making all of this hang together. Now, the first thing to say is that I've added result nodes. That's another thing I've added. So I've put these in there to make sure that we don't get any problems with the monoflop. We might not on this occasion, but I've just put them in anyway. So they're worth adding. And then our compares here, these are always equal to 0, these top ones. So the P-storm is always set up at equals to 0. These, they increment in steps of 2. So it's a case of 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and finally 10 that you need to place in all of these in sequence through here. The second compares. The first one is greater than 45. The second is greater than 75, and then 105, etc., as I said, up to 195. So that's how I've set those up. You don't have to do it that way. You can choose to make them, different intervals if you wish to, but that's just how I set those up. Okay, so those two are set up that way. So that's quite important. And then I think that's all we need to worry about. Let's have a look. So data, yes, we don't need to worry about that. The matrices, don't really need to worry about those because we've covered that. And obviously with the controller, you just simply go into wherever you need to get your gravity from. So it's going to be whichever one of these you happen to be working on, that's the one you're going to choose, and exactly the same will apply to the S and the target and base splines. Basically, you just choose whichever ones you need to work with. It's as simple as that. And on this occasion, of course, we're working with the S, so they're both grayed out. But that's pretty much it. And I suppose I may as well just say drag your matrix into here, whichever one you're working with. So yeah, that's the golden rule, really. Just make sure that you just set everything up. I mean, you don't even have to name everything, of course, but I think it just makes life a lot easier if you do that, because you can see exactly what's doing what and how the things actually relate to each other. But yeah, I mean, essentially that is it. The only thing you do get, and I think it's because we're using user data, if you go back to the beginning, it doesn't reset. You just have to step forward one frame and then go back to 0, which is a bit of a pain. But as I say, I think that's something to do with the fact that we are actually using a controller here and we've got all this user data. I think that's what is a cause of, because the user data is actually is kind of a step removed from the workflow that's going on in here, and I think that's what causes the problem. I mean, with the Expresso here, I've put them as generators and -1, but you can play around with this in any combination and play around with this number in here, and you won't find that you'll be able to make it reset to 0, to its initial point at 0. You always have to give it this one extra touch on here. It's a bit annoying, but unfortunately I don't think there's any way that we can fix it. But if you can fix that and you do find a way, then please reach out and let me know what it is. But anyway, I think that just about covers everything and brings us to an end of this particular tutorial. So as always, I really hope you've enjoyed doing this one and that you've got some new ideas for some techniques that you can use within your own projects. And if you have enjoyed the video, then please give it a like. And as always, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and of course, ring the bell. And wherever you happen to be on social media, please do share this video, because all this good stuff really does help keep the channel moving in the right direction. But anyway, that about brings the curtain down on this one. So I'll see you very soon on the next tutorial.